Oh, okay, we're officially live. I didn't realize it gave a little banner like that telling us. Um, but yeah, we can just wait a few minutes. I think it'll be a little bit till we get some more viewers, but um, yeah, in the meantime, how are you? Oh, June, I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, I was saying, I was doing good. How can we check like who's in the or
Oh,
like
who's
viewing
viewing
it?
the stream?
Oh,
If you
go.
go to the actual Twitch,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and then you'll just kind of see
Oh,
us twice.
oh no. There goes my internet. Oh, there it is. Oh, cool. Hello, hello.
Yeah, so it looks like we have 0 viewers right now, so we'll give it a couple minutes.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, and we can start introductions kind of once at least a few people are watching, hopefully. Oh, maybe my page refreshed slowly. We actually have 3 viewers. Hi, welcome. Um, feel free to say hi in the chat if you guys are, especially if you guys are here from Serverless Camp, let us know. I'd love to know if some of our students are coming. Okay. Um, but yeah, so we will get started in a couple minutes. Also, let me know where you guys are tuning in from. Actually, I'm just interested to see. Oh, hey, you're here from Serverless. Nice. I don't recognize, I guess your username is not like similar to your actual name because I do not recognize. But hi, glad you're here. Um, yeah, I know for serverless, for our serverless camp, if you know anyone here isn't from serverless camp, it's just the current program that Bit Project is hosting. It's basically like an 8-week technical boot camp, kind of. Um, oh, Shreya wants us to pose for a screenshot for social media.
Oh, okay.
All right, real smile.
Okay. I'm assuming okay.
Yeah, she got it. um, but yeah, like as I was saying, in case people here are tuning in from, oh hey Paris, yeah, okay, we've talked before, but nice to see you here. Um, yeah, so basically for anyone who doesn't know, Serverless Camp is just our like 8-week technical program, kind of like a boot camp where students get to learn how to use Azure Serverless and kind of build their own final project based on what we teach them in the first 4 weeks. So yeah, and we are going to be having a tech conference on August 15th. So people can kind of present some of their projects that they worked on. So definitely, if you're interested, visit the website. That'll be like a cool thing to tune into. And we'll have a lot of different tech speakers there and presentations for you guys to learn all about serverless architecture. In terms of It's 12:02, so I guess we could still wait a couple minutes.
Yeah, or we could have a private tutoring session with Paris.
Yeah, you'll get like a special
Yeah.
solo session for free. Um, but yeah, we can give it a little longer. So I think hopefully a couple more students will join. I know people RSVP'd and showed some interest, so at the very least, I'm sure they'll watch this recording back afterwards. Um, but yeah, June, how's your week been?
Pretty good. A little bit tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. Um, busy schedule during the week with meetings, but all fun, all fun.
Yeah.
What about you? Oh, I was gonna ask like, what are you doing on the weekend? And actually is the weekend. So
Yeah.
this is what you're
Well,
doing.
this, yeah, definitely doing this for part of the weekend. I'm actually on call for work right after this, so that'll be like the next 24 hours where I should probably just stay home in case I get paged. Um,
Mm.
but
How many
yeah.
times have you been paged?
Um, so I mean, so far none because technically I got someone to cover like this short time that I'm doing this. But I checked and they have also not gotten paged, which I feel good about because I didn't want to have to make them deal with stuff that technically should have been on call for. Um, but usually like a weekend we'll have like anywhere from like 1 to 5 maybe. It really varies a lot, but I
Wait.
know.
Oh, I was asking about how many times you've been paged like this year.
Oh, this year. A lot more than that, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Generally during the day shifts, there'll be more pages. Overnight, we only page if it's like something, I guess, like more urgent. So those tend to be less if it's like overnight or on a weekend.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, like our shifts are pretty common. So like it'll usually be like every day it's like rotates. And you'll have like a few per day, generally speaking.
I mean,
Obviously, the
what's
goal is
breaking
to
in
have much less. I don't know.
the
I'd love to figure that
I'm a little bit
out.
concerned about AWS.
Yeah, it's if you're gonna have that many customers, there's gonna be issues for
Okay.
all the teams. I know some teams have way worse than we do. I think we're pretty
Oh,
tame. But I know like teams whose products get used a lot more or like are kind of just having issues a lot more frequently because they have like things that are applicable to like all AWS customers. Um, they'll definitely be paged more. So I'm just thankful I'm not on one of those. Um, but yeah, in terms of this presentation, there aren't too many people, but I think we should get started. It's
okay.
12:06, and I don't want to be too pressed for time. So yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So I just wanted to start. So first of all, everyone, just welcome to our preparing for the technical interview workshop. Basically, in this presentation, we're just going to kind of talk through what to expect when you are going through the interview process for a software engineer and how best to prepare for especially the technical interview parts. Um, and yeah, June, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is June. I'm currently a senior engineering manager at Target, based out of Minneapolis. But before that, I was based out of the Bay Area, working as a lead engineer for Walmart. I was there at Walmart for a little over 4 years. Before that, a startup for pharmaceutical stuff, and then before that, computer science at University of Michigan.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I have way less experience, but I will also introduce my short background, work background. So basically, I graduated from the University of Illinois in 2020, so just last year. And then I've been working for about a year at Amazon, specifically AWS, as a software engineer. So in terms of like experience, I obviously throughout college went through a lot of interviews myself, so I have kind of the perspective of someone who's going through the interview process and some of my own like tips and things I learned to share from that. And then June, of course, he has conducted a lot of interviews, so he has a really good perspective of like the person who's actually going to be interviewing you. Um, so he can speak more about that throughout the presentation. But yeah, so let's get started. Just pulling up my notes real quick. I literally just had them open and I lost them somehow. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we are. Um, yeah, so just to get started, I wanted to start off talking about just the different types of interview stages. So Generally speaking, and this does vary a lot from company to company, but generally speaking, a lot of companies start off with a phone screen. So after you apply and after they read through your resume, if they want you to move forward or want to get to know more about you, they'll usually schedule a phone screen. And then after that, for a lot of software positions, it'll move on to kind of a remote coding interview or assignment. It could be like a take-home assignment where they like give you a problem and you have time to work on it, or it could be just a link to something that you're supposed to complete within an hour. But it will still be just some sort of assignment to gauge your coding skills, basically. And then generally after that, a lot of companies will have either one or multiple, more generally multiple rounds of technical interviews. So before COVID, a lot of these were on-site events where you would have kind of 4 to 5 in a row. But because of the pandemic, I think most of it has switched to virtual. So companies might have changed like the way they do it. But I know, at least for myself, like it was still all the virtual interviews in a row. So it still kind of resembled an on-site, just not in person. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the basic, like, different types of stages you can expect in the process. However, and I'm sure June can speak to this a little bit as well, it is going to vary a lot from company to company. Just one example I can think of is with bigger companies, it tends to be much more like defined and automated of a process. So they may have more rounds, especially if they have a lot more applicants to go through. Um, they may not have as many people talking to in the beginning. It may be more automated until you get to later stages. And then for smaller companies, especially like startups, it might be your second interview and you're already talking to like a VP or something, just because there's a lot less people to talk to. So that process might be a lot more personalized and just a lot more collaborative and being able to talk to a lot of different people at the company. Um, but yeah, June, do you have anything to add here for kind of how it varies?
Yeah, I mean, just I guess a word of caution that everything we're discussing today isn't like a silver bullet. This isn't like exactly what you're gonna experience in every interview. But it is a good guideline, and a lot of factors, including like where you are in your career already. Are you a new grad, or are you switching careers like 10 years in, or are you interested in consulting or contracting versus like full time? Like those are all going to affect what types of interviews you're going to have to.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say like as a general rule of thumb, you can expect that a lot of these components that we talk about in the presentation are applicable to most of the experiences you guys will have interviewing. But for specific companies, anytime you've applied to a company and you do get to whatever the next stage is after applying, definitely you need to specifically research that company and their process and just spend a lot of time understanding what their specific process looks like. That'll always be really helpful, especially because a lot of people tend to, even if it's not the company itself, a lot of people will just kind of post online about their interviewing experiences, especially for bigger companies. So generally, like a quick Google search, you can find a lot of information about how they conduct their interviews and what to expect. Um, yeah, so moving on, I wanted to talk about kind of each
Hold on. Did you
stage.
want
Yeah,
to, Paris asked a question in chat. Do you want to do questions as we go or at the
yeah,
end?
let's do questions as we
Okay.
go. I think it'll be easier if it's as we go. Um, what's okay? So Paris asked, what is the best type of company to go to for a first job? Startup, medium, or larger company, or does it depend? So I think we both probably have maybe like our own personal answers for this. As someone who, just started off my first job not too long ago, when I was in college and, people were talking about what kind of jobs they were looking for the first job, I think generally it really depended on the person and kind of what you were looking for. For me, I did have some interviewing experiences at like much smaller companies, and of course, like the one I ended up choosing, Amazon, is like one of the biggest companies, so there's a lot of differences there. Um, I think in terms of I guess like in terms of picking, for me, I thought it was really important to kind of try to get more information about what type of team you're joining, what types of things they work on, and see if it's a fit that way. And I think another thing that I thought was really important was the culture fit. So seeing how you got along with your interviewers, looking up things about the company's culture and values and seeing how that kind of fit was. I will say for a company like Amazon or like bigger tech companies, generally the name brand does play into a decision there. Obviously, just everyone knows the names of those bigger tech companies. So as a first job, it could look really great on your resume and for like future employers that they went through this type of like rigorous company's application process and they were able to work there and succeed there. That can look really good. So I think for me that was definitely part of it as well. I think for like it also depends if you're, and like June mentioned, if you're a new grad or not, that can also impact what kind of company you think is best for your first role. But yeah, June, do you want to add your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to like repose the question and say like it's not really, well, first of all, like if you're asking specifically about a first job, right? It's probably because you're wondering like, hey, like I'm new to this, where can I learn the best and grow the most, right? But at the same time, like that should never change. Like whether you're just starting your career in tech or 20 years down the road, you should always be learning and always be trying to grow, right? And within the world of like tech, there's, even if you're a small startup with like 4 people, you can tackle the hardest problems, right, that we have in the tech industry. So it's not, like just because you go to a small company, that doesn't mean you're only going to be tackling small problems, right? You can also tackle big problems there too. So in a sense, it's not really even about small, medium, or big company. I would say like follow the people, right? Like you're not going to learn if you have a supportive team that can like help you learn, and you're not going to grow if you don't have a supportive manager that can help you grow, right? And also, like if your manager doesn't give you hard problems, it doesn't matter if you're in a big company, right? You might just be doing documentation all day, which you don't want to be doing, right? So I think as an interviewee, it's really important when you're doing the interview with these companies, whether it's small, medium, or big, like understanding like, hey, do I fit in well with these people? And like, will these people support me? And, obviously important for a first job, but also just for the rest of your career too, right? I didn't join Walmart or, Target because they were big companies. I joined because the people convinced me that, I'd belong there and that they'd be supportive, and they were. And that's why I'm still at Target now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think like especially as someone starting out, and like speaking from the experience of someone who is only a year into my like software engineering role, I think it's really important to have the type of team where they're going to be able to support you and mentor you, especially like looking at asking questions during the interview process about kind of how they support new hires, how they mentor people and help them grow and learn faster. I think that's really important. So yeah, I think that like June, those were great points. Just like really looking at the people and like the type of team that you're actually joining should be like a big factor of kind of what you decide to go to. Um, but yeah, awesome. Thank you for the question. We can keep going with the interview process. So um, in terms of like the types of interviews, right? So generally speaking, the phone screen will be the first part of it. And these can be, depending on the company, they may have you hold a phone screen with a recruiter or maybe a technical person. So of course, one or the other is going to heavily affect what the phone screen actually looks like. For some companies, if it's just with the recruiter, obviously it will be a little less technical based and more just talking about behavioral questions. And the types of behavioral questions usually are pretty common. Of course, they're going to have like, tell me about yourself or speak about one of the projects on your resume, speak about a past work experience. So it's really important for the phone screen to really know your resume inside and out and have just have practiced talking about yourself in that way. It's not really, even if you obviously you yourself know what you've done best, but just going into an interview without having practiced actually what you would say about various projects and things generally does not work too well because you kind of don't really know, you start rambling or you don't really know like the main points that you want to be getting across in the moment. So it's important to prepare for these, even if it's not as technical as the other portions of the interview. But yeah, so generally companies will be open about how the phone screen is going to be. So if you do ever get scheduled one, you should just ask them straight up whether it's going to be with a recruiter or a technical person, and see if they can give you any information on what to expect. They're not really there to make you fail, so they'll definitely want to give you information that'll help you prepare. So it's a good idea to always ask in advance. And in terms of what they're looking for, generally for the phone screen, it's a little less about your technical skills and more just about your experience, and whether you're excited about the company and the role. You should do a lot of research on the company beforehand to learn about kind of their like company values and culture, and be able to explain why you're a good fit. Basically, you're trying to convince them that you are a good person to hire and you belong at that company. So yeah, that's what I guess would say for the phone screen. June, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I would have said too. We did get a question though in the chat. It says, any tips for people who get an informational call with recruiter step before a phone screen interview? I'll let you take this one, Misha.
Sure, yeah. So honestly, I have not had too many experiences where I had an informational call first, but from like, what I've researched and spoken to other people about, I think generally people try to use this as like the biggest time to just ask a lot of questions and get a lot of information about the company, the role. A lot of things that you get out of this conversation might not be things that you could just research from the company on your own, because you're talking to someone who actually is recruiting for them and working for them. So just going into that prepared with as many questions as you want to know about the company, I think would be really great. But June, do you want to add to that? I'm sure like you've been on the other side of it too.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. And also, I mean, to like how you should do exactly, how exactly you should conduct these calls, but consider like from our perspective too, right? As the hiring manager or the recruiter, as the company, like we're trying to sell our company and market us to you as an awesome place to work. So for us, like these informational calls, if it's, truly what they say is like, hey, like we just want to like talk and let you know about the opportunity, like that's like from our perspective, like we want to answer as many questions you have about the company, like don't try to focus so much about like, oh, I'm so good at like this technical thing and I've done all this, like, that's all going to happen. And, they've seen your resumes, but, this is one of the few chances you'll get to really kind of ask the honest questions, right? Like you can ask things like, what's PTO like, or pay time off like, or, how big or small the teams are, or like how they, you can ask even harder questions like how do you encourage equity among like underrepresented people, engineers, and like in the organization. And those are really hard questions. But those, obviously ask the ones that are important to you. And you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to ask that because you get what, like 30 minutes for a technical interview. You're not going to have a lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is like your best bet at getting all your questions answered. They always ask if you have questions at the end of other interview portions, but generally you only have like 10 minutes by that point to even ask your questions. So it's not a lot of time to really like dive deep into everything you want to know about the company or the role. So yeah, informational interviews are great for you to get more info. Um, was that the only question? Okay, cool. Yeah, so we can move on to the online coding challenge portion. So, and we will a little later in the presentation talk more about actually how to prepare for everything. So if you have questions specific to preparation, we might answer those later. But for now, I just kind of want to talk about at a high level what each portion is. So for the online coding challenge, June, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about how these work?
Yeah, so I mean, I won't read through our notes here, but from my perspective as like the hiring manager, and having gone through actually one of these for Target, but I won't go through the one for Target right now. We might run out of time, so I'll link it to Misha, and then she can share it with the rest of you folks as an example. So that one was for engineering manager, but it's very similar. What we're trying to do is gauge. Um, your coding skills, but also at the same time, they'll vary. Like sometimes they're, straight up assessments where they'll just ask you straight up technical questions and you just, sometimes they're even multiple choice and you just have to answer them. But really, like we want to differentiate this from like the actual technical interview where you're sitting down with someone, well, virtually, and doing the lead code question. For the take home, we really want to see like, can you do the job? And I mean, especially during the pandemic now, everybody's working from home. Like, and it's basically a take home assignment, right? Like you're at home and you do the work and you sync up or do stand up with your team every day, every other day, whatever. Um, so that's the end goal, right? Is to see like, hey, if we were to give you this, assignment that's, somewhat on the same, level of difficulty of coding, can you actually do it? And when we talk about it, can you actually explain to me, like why you've done this or, what you've done?
Yeah, and yeah, just to add to that, so June briefly mentioned kind of how they vary a lot. So just as a heads up, these can be pretty different from company to company. So when we say like the online coding challenge or like the remote coding assignment, whatever they call it, generally it's something that they send for you to do on your own time to gauge your coding skills. So the ones that I've seen a lot usually are where they'll send you kind of maybe a link to a hacker rank or something, and you'll have like a certain set amount of time. It could be like an hour, it could be 2 hours, to just log into whatever they send you. That you see a coding problem and you have to basically code out the solution. And those will tend to be more automated. So they'll have like an automated way for you to check your answers sometimes. If they're feeling nice, sometimes maybe they won't have that and you'll just have to submit it and like hope for the best. But generally they'll give you like a way to kind of test your code or run your code within there. um, for the one that June actually did recently for his role, that was kind of a longer version of it. So that one resembles, I would say it resembles a actual workplace more, in that they give you a problem right off the bat, and then they give you like, not just an hour, but like a few days to think about it and actually code out the solution. And um, they're a lot, the code itself will generally be a lot longer and more involved than the like 1 to 2 hour ones that I'm talking about. So um, just as an example, like those are two pretty different ways that companies can do this portion of the interview. So again, it's really important to check your specific company, what you're applying to, check online how they do it, because it's going to be different. Um, but in terms of what they're looking for, that pretty much stays the same. Like June mentioned, they're just looking for like, your coding and problem solving skills, and then also just to see kind of how you work through a problem, how you approach a problem, and how you're able to solve it. And I guess also I want to mention they do look for um, algorithm and data structure knowledge most usually. So being pretty familiar with those is going to be helpful for any technical interview. Even like I mentioned before with the phone screen, if they ask some basic technical questions, those would usually be about one of those two topics as well. Um, yeah, and then so moving on, if you pass the coding assessment, you get a good score, they like see your code and they want you to come in for the next round. Usually that'll be when you start the actual, I guess like what a lot of people see as like daunting technical interviews. This is when you're actually sitting down with the interviewers and given a problem there on the spot, and you have to kind of talk them through it or code through it depending on the exact format of the interview. So June, do you want to talk a little bit about like from your perspective, how these go and like the purpose of them?
Sorry, the on-sites or
Yeah, like the on-sites or with COVID, the virtual interviews.
yeah, I mean, like, there's really not much to say. Like, I mean, it's still just as exhausting, maybe even a little bit more exhausting than on-site, to be honest, because, you know, like there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
Staring at the screen, that blue light really does. Maybe that's a good tip is have like a blue light filter or something, because you're staring at these people. They're great, lovely people for like 4 or 5 hours, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, but you'll go through, I mean, usually, I don't know if you mentioned this already, it's about 4 or 5 interviews. You'll get, depending on like where you are in your career, like new grads will get a lot more technical interviews. And sometimes they'll even switch the behavioral one to just a manager screen, which in a sense is still like a behavioral interview, but it's a little bit less formal. If you're contracting, you'll get a lot. You might actually not even get an on-site. You might just do a couple technical interviews. um, I don't know. I mean, like anything in particular you're wondering?
I guess could you speak a little bit about what people or what the interviewers are really looking for you to demonstrate in these types of interviews?
Yeah. So, um, well, okay. I'll speak to like high level a bit. So, almost all companies, if not probably all, will have like a quorum at the end of these on-sites. They'll bring together the people who interviewed you and, talk through it. And, we're trying to be holistic, right? Like just because you did badly on one technical doesn't necessarily mean, you're a bad developer. Maybe you did well in everything else. There are some companies where it is like kind of like you have to like ace everything. So I know my friend went through Netflix and you really have to like get a strong yes from like every person that said that interviewed you. But for other companies, it's you can get away with. Well, I don't want to say you're getting away with, but you don't necessarily have to ace everything. What we're looking for is we get that you guys are nervous like during the interviews. Like I'm nervous myself, even right now, and even when I do conduct the interviews too. I'm nervous for the person. But can you like this is what work is going to be like, right? You're going to talk to like dozen plus people every day. You're going to have to work with new people. You're going to be given problems that you didn't expect. And obviously behavioral questions, like no one's going to ask you those in reality, but you will actually have to like come across those on a day to day. So they're really looking for like, can you thrive in our, at our organization and our company? And that's why these on-sites are so different between each company too. Some of them think, hey, behavioral is a lot more important and you'll have 3 behavioral and 2 technical. Some of them think, hey, technical is more important and you'll have 4 technical and 1 manager screen, right? So make sure when you talk to your recruiter in the informational call, like the phone screen, like what the interview process is like, and ask them like, don't just accept it, like ask them why it is that way. Like, why do you have 4 technical or why do you have 3 behavioral, right? And understand like they'd love if you asked, I'm sure they'd love to tell you like what exactly they're looking for in each interview, because there is a process, right, that they go through for everybody.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great advice. And yeah, I think it's important to understand going into it what they're looking for as well. So you're not just, so you can kind of cater the way you handle the interview to what they're looking for. Um, yeah, I think you pretty much covered all of it. But like June mentioned, these aren't necessarily all technical. There's usually going to be multiple. So like at least some of them might be behavioral, or the way I've seen it, sometimes they'll do like a mix. So each interview will have some technical and some behavioral. That's also a possibility. So it is really important to just ask the company ahead of time what you can expect with these. Um, in terms of the difficulty, generally speaking, the technical problems in these interviews will be harder than the coding, the like remote coding challenge. Additionally, depending on the company, they might use these interviews to ask you about the remote coding challenge. So maybe talk a little bit about how you solve that problem, or like ask you questions about specifically about parts of your code, why you did something a certain way. Um, this is really, I mean, it's to talk about like your problem solving skills and your coding and get more insight on why you coded that way. But as like a side thing, it also does guarantee that you know what you're talking about, and like you're actually the person who completed the remote challenge, which of course you always should be. So if you didn't, they would definitely figure it out quickly enough. So just never, never don't do your own coding challenge is a good word of advice. But yeah, so these final stages will be multiple rounds. It does get tiring, so definitely like for practice, try to go into it knowing that you're going to have like many interviews in a row. I think doing other interviews is the best type of practice, but also just maybe when you're doing your interview prep, do it for like longer amounts of time, or try to practice multiple coding problems in a row at home, so you can kind of know what it's like to be able to have to do this when your brain is kind of tired after like a few hours. Um, but yeah, I think that pretty much covered like the details of that. So moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about preparation and kind of the best ways to prepare for both the behavioral aspects and the technical aspects of these interview rounds. I guess like June, if you want to go first, what would you say are like the most important tips for preparing for a behavioral interview?
Yeah, so I will say, maybe not the most important, but I guarantee you somebody will ask you, why do you want to join this company? Make sure you have a good answer for that, because everybody's asked it and everybody has the same answer. It's
Hmm.
generally things like, oh, I just wanted to try something new, or like I want to learn something, but like, and we're not looking for like, for example, at Target, someone asked me that, and it wasn't about like, oh, I love Target, I totally believe in Target. And nor did I join Walmart for the same reason either. Like I didn't join Walmart because I loved Walmart and I always bought my stuff at Walmart. Everybody kind of like sees through that, obviously. So make sure, the reason, you do have a good reason why you want to join. For me, Target, there were lots of reasons. I won't go through it all. One of the biggest one was their organizational structure, how the teams were actually formed and structured. It was a lot more conducive to like agile development, and I was really excited to be involved in that. So that is one. Target is pretty cool though, yes. um, so that is one that will be asked, and you need to have a good answer for. And please do, you were saying, Misha, earlier, like some of the technical interviews will be mixed with behavioral.
Hmm.
And especially those ones, obviously do well on the technical part, but show your interest in you know the company, and well, maybe not even the company, but like the team or the opportunity or the role. And ask them questions like, hey, like, why do you like your job, and why are you still there? And even if it might seem a little bit awkward, it's a lot better than like, the one I always get, and is definitely a cop out, is, oh, when can I hear back about like the results of the interview, or things like that. Like, like that's not important, right? Like, if you're interviewing for a company, what's important to you is like, do you actually want to work here? Do you fit in here,
Hmm.
right? So we want to see that like engagement and interest from you as well. um, One last note about the behavioral. There are a million different types of questions they can throw at you, and it's probably impossible to like prep or like have a script for all of them. Not that I'm saying you should have a script, but really just like be a nice person, and be a supportive person. And like that's what I'm looking for, is like, I don't need the best engineer in the world, right? Like someone who knows like byte level code, but I need someone, if I hire anybody into my team, I need someone who can get along with my teammates, and help raise the bar, not just for themselves and the company, but for their peers as well. Yeah, be a nice person. I mean, like, really, that's the simplest way to put it.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great advice, definitely. makes sense to kind of keep all those things into account when you're preparing. Um, yeah, especially just in terms of the script part, I did want to say this, of course, doesn't mean you can't practice, but you don't need to have like a written out script that you're just going to use as like an answer for all of your questions. Generally, like it'll be kind of obvious when you're doing this as well if it sounds very scripted and not natural. Of course, no one is going to be mad at you for preparing, but I think in terms of preparation, it's more about just knowing your resume really well, having one or two projects or work experiences that are relevant to what you're applying for to talk about. So what I usually do is like I'll go through a couple of projects or previous work experiences, and I'll just make sure I remember all the details of what I did, and not just what I did, but um, think of it from like an interviewer's perspective. So basically, for a project, okay, like this project, I had to work with someone difficult. That's something I should be able to talk about because generally interviewers would want to know something like that. Um, so basically just like looking at common behavioral questions and then seeing which of your already like things you already have about your projects or stories line up with things that you could use as a response, I guess would be the best way to say it. Hopefully that made sense to everyone. Um, but yeah, other than that, I think, like June mentioned, just research the company and role, especially for that one question of why do you want to work here? It's going to be really obvious if you didn't research the company at all because they're going to know it's just like a generic answer. They're really looking for someone who is at least interested enough to look them up and figure out like why they want to work there. So that's also really important.
Use
One other
Glassdoor.
yeah, that's actually a great point. I didn't. I'll add that to the list of resources at the end. But um, websites like Glassdoor have a lot of information about different companies' interviewing practices. They have posts from people who interviewed themselves, talking exactly. I mean, obviously it depends from the post to post, but a lot of them will talk even specifics about what their experience was like, what kind of questions they were asked. Um, like how they viewed the process overall. So I think websites like that are really helpful to get some insight before you're walking in. So you're not like going in blind to the interviews. You have some sort of idea of what other people have experienced at the same company. Um, and then one other thing, I guess, before we move on to more of the technical prep, I would say just in general, try to mock interview with people if you can. I think this is applicable for behavioral and technical interviews, but if you have people that can just sit down with you and like ask you some of the some questions you give them, and you can practice saying your responses, that's always really helpful versus just going into it without having practiced with another person. Also, I think a lot of times if you mock interview with someone, they can usually point things out that you could improve on that you wouldn't have noticed if you're just, rehearsing in the mirror or something. So definitely try to interview at least with one other person, even if it's like, it doesn't have to be someone who's in the industry. It can just be like a sibling or your parents or something. But just someone to be able to listen to how you say your answers and give feedback. Um, yeah, so I think that's, pretty much the main pieces of advice I would have for behavioral. June, do you want to start talking about more of the technical prep and kind of some best ways to prepare for that portion?
Actually, why don't you start that off? Because I haven't prepared for a technical in a long time, but I'm sure you have recently.
Yeah, that's fair. I wasn't that long. It feels long ago, but it was only in 2020 that I was preparing for interviews. Um, Yeah, I have probably a lot to say about technical preparation. First and foremost, just don't underestimate the technical portion of the interview. Um, oh, actually, sorry, we have a couple of questions. I think before I get into all this, it might be nice to just go through these. Um, so Shreya asked, what do you think about pair programming to prepare? Um, June, do you want to give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, pair programming is like the perfect way to prepare because that's literally what the interview is, right? So, sure, there's some interviewers who are very hands off and will just like stay silent and muted the whole time. But it shouldn't be like that for the majority of folks, it is supposed to be like a guided um, exercise per se. They'll ask you questions, you'll ask them questions to clarify. They'll kind of guide you in whatever way they want. And I mean, isn't that what pair programming is, right? Like, what's one person drives the implementation and the actual like typing, and the other person helps kind of guide them, right? So it's really one and the same. I would hope. Obviously, it's a lot more pressure on you as the interviewee, but it is a good way to prepare for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just add, in the interviews that I've personally experienced, a lot of interviewers do try to be nice and friendly and guide you through it a little bit. So, of course, some will, like June said, be pretty quiet, but I think more often than not, I've had interviewers that are pretty engaged, even if, of course, you're not expecting them to do it for you or help you too much. Ideally, you want to have limited help because you're supposed to be showing them that you can do the problem on your own. But the nice thing is they will often help you if you want to, if once you're talking out loud through your process, you can kind of bounce ideas off them. Depending on the interviewer, some of them might guide you towards like something that's, more correct or less correct, or they might like kind of prompt you with questions that could help you get to an answer. So um, that's usually like kind of a collaborative experience. So it's, pair programming is similar in that you need to collaborate with someone regarding a coding problem. Um, and then I think we had one other question. If the recruiter asks, do you know this specific language or tool? But we honestly don't know. Do you have tips for this question?
Okay, so I have a very strong opinion about this. If you don't know it, like, just say you don't know it. Like, even if you have a little bit of like, for example, like I don't know, for me, like Lisp, I've used Lisp for like 2 months in, I don't know, 3 months in like a class in college. So if I looked it up, sure, I'd be able to like use it. But if someone asked me, I'd be like, no, I don't. I've, like briefly kind of used it, but I don't know it. Like, please be honest, because well, first of all, you don't want to seem dishonest. That looks
Yeah.
bad, regardless of the type of interview you're having. But also, it's not important how much you know right now. Like, oh, I know 70 languages and I've built like 100 like side projects. Like, that's completely irrelevant. What the most important thing is can you, given something you don't know, right? Can you solve for it and can you learn it, right? So if you say you know this and then like and they ask you something and you know you're struggling, like that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That definitely does not paint you in a good light that you said you know something and then immediately struggle to answer a question about it. Yeah, and like June said, because like, we're mostly talking about people just entering the tech industry, whether you're a new grad or entering from a different career, you still are new to tech. So they don't usually expect you to know like, 100 different languages or anything crazy like that. It's more just about knowing one like just at least knowing one language well is enough for a technical interview. You don't need to even know multiple, just knowing one, but knowing it really well as you can prepare would be better in the long run anyway. So, and yeah, like in general for software jobs, a lot of times you might end up using a language that you are not familiar with. At Amazon currently, I use Java for work. Like my team codes entirely in Java, but when I was interviewing, I interviewed in Python. I also barely used Java in college, so I don't even have it listed on my resume as a language. So that just goes to show they're not really going to care if you don't know the specific language they use. It's more just about knowing programming in general, and then you can on the job pick up any language that you need to. Um, but yeah, thank you, Beatrix. Great question. So yeah, I guess now we can kind of go into the technical prep. So in terms of preparing for the technical interview, like I was saying before, do not underestimate it. You should spend a lot of time studying, like the way you would for an exam. You have to study for technical interviews in the same way, like actually sitting down, going through material, going through practice problems. Um, in terms of specifically what to study, so even before diving into like the coding problems and getting that part of it, you should also just have a good overview of CS fundamentals. Most coding challenges or coding interviews are, especially for people new to tech, I think it gets a little more abstract and more related to design if you go like higher up, for higher up positions. But for like very, entry level junior positions, they're really focused on data structures and algorithms. So you just have to know like all the basic data structures, like linked lists, trees, diction, like hash maps. You should know how they work. You don't need to be able to, like build one yourself, but for the structure, you should know kind of how it works under the hood, know some details about, um, how it stores things or like whatever the structure does, like know how it works. And then for algorithms, again, you don't really need to like memorize specific ones, I would say. There are a few in general, like for each data structure that I would recommend knowing. So, for example, for a binary search tree, you should know the algorithm to search through that tree and find something. That's like a pretty basic thing. But in terms of the algorithms that you would be writing to actually solve the coding problems, generally for those, you will use that basic knowledge, but you will still have to kind of think of things on the spot and figure out, okay, how do I actually code up the solution to this problem right now? It's not going to be like you go into a interview and like you've seen the problem necessarily and know the exact solution already, because that also doesn't really help them gauge how your problem solving skills are. If you already knew it going into it, it's not too helpful. But yeah, so I would say for that, study CS fundamentals. There are so many online resources, books, and courses. I'll point to a few towards the end of the presentation, but there are so many resources out there. Learning CS has never been more accessible. So basically, even if you are coming from a non-traditional background, you haven't taken college courses or a boot camp or something like that, I still think it is very doable for you to just put in the effort and use online resources and learn a lot of that same knowledge. Even coming from someone who actually like did a traditional 4-year undergrad, I still had to study separately for these interviews. Just having college courses in these topics wasn't really enough. You still have to do very like dedicated prep towards interviews because it doesn't exactly mimic what you're learning in college anyway. So it's definitely not, in my opinion, I don't think it's really, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not really like a setback, I guess, if you are coming from a non-traditional background. I think it's, with the right prep, you can just as easily get a tech job. So that's kind of one of the nice things about CS. It really is, I think, learnable for everyone. In terms of, let me move on though a little for technical prep. Obviously, a big part of what we've been talking about is actually the coding interviews themselves. So for this, I mentioned this before, but just pick one programming language and know it well and choose to do all your interviews in that. Generally, interviews are pretty open. They don't usually tell you to use only one specific language. If they do, you would know about it ahead of time and you can prepare accordingly. But I think that would really only come up for maybe like some really specific role or something. But yeah, for like general junior software engineers, you can just use any language that you know. They will, at the very least, let you code in the most popular languages like Java, Python, C, C++, usually JavaScript even. So yeah, like in terms of languages, just pick one, know it really well, and practice all of your coding. Like when you're studying, practice everything in that one language. Just make sure with that language you have the syntax down. You can like make sure you like know all the different data structures, different ways to use the language. I think that'll be really important. And then in terms of practicing, there are a lot of websites out there like LeetCode, HackerRank that have literally hundreds of practice problems for you to do. Like they have way more than anyone could ever get through basically in preparing for an interview. So you're definitely not going to run out of practice for this kind of thing. I myself have done like such a small portion of the total number of questions that LeetCode has, and I was studying quite a lot when I was preparing. So you're definitely not going to run out in that sense. in terms of how to actually practice when you're doing a problem, I think it's really important to one, just think about each problem before you actually start writing the code. Think about what the problem is asking, what you want your solution to look like, what kind of approach you're going to take. It's really good practice to actually think out loud. In the interview itself, you're expected to like it shouldn't just be quiet when you're thinking the whole time, because then the interviewer doesn't have any idea of what your thought process is. So, um, one thing that takes a lot of getting used to, even if you're good at these coding problems, you still need additional practice to just be able to talk about it out loud. So, once you get the problem, you should already like, you can obviously take a minute or two to think about it quietly, but as soon as you start kind of coming up with a solution, you should out loud be saying like, okay, looking at this problem, I think this is the way I'm going to do it, and here's why. Um, and then even while you code, talk out loud to your interviewer about explaining what logic you're currently using, or like why you are choosing to use, one data structure over another. Basically, anything that you would be thinking to yourself while doing these problems, you should try to say out loud. And that'll also look really good because it shows that you can communicate about your code. Because communicating about your code is just as important as writing it. It's really hard to work with people as like an actual software engineer if you're working with people who can't explain something that they wrote, because then like it's really hard for other people to just be able to understand what the code is and like collaborate with them if they don't know what you're talking about. So definitely important to practice that part of it. And that's why I think the mock interviews that I mentioned before are really important for this. Um, in terms of timing, another big thing is practicing in a timed setting. So I think when you're starting out, it's fine not to, because it does take a while to get used to these types of problems. But once you're further along in your interview preparation, you should try to time these to be, like 30, 45 minutes of the problem, including like all the debugging and actually getting to the solution. That should all be around 30 to 45 minutes. That's usually how much time you'll have in a real interview. Um, so you want to make sure, like, even if you prepare a lot, if you go into it not having timed it, you could end up easily running out of time. It's very easy to do. Even when I practice, like a lot of times I'll take more than the actual allotted time of an interview. So that's something to keep in mind and make sure you're not forgetting. Um, and then I think I think that's kind of mostly what I had for the technical part. I guess one other thing that I want to add is um, you should pay a lot of attention to the solutions even after you have something working. It's not necessarily the best solution. A big part of these coding interviews is that there are going to be multiple solutions, but interviewers are looking at once you have, maybe if you have one of the slower solutions, or like not as good solutions, can you think about it further, and can you improve your current way of doing it to come up with something better? That's like a big part of interviews and just practicing in general. So I would say that's also something to keep in mind. Yeah, I feel like I spoke a lot just now about the technical prep. June, do you have anything to add?
The only thing that was pretty comprehensive. I think that's good. The only thing that I would add is like don't be like too tunnel visioned into like doing so much leak code and just trying to get them done. Obviously, take less time and really understand them, because think about it as if like you're going to explain it to like a fifth grader, like how
Mhm.
this works. Because even if you get the answer right, I'm gonna ask you questions like deeper and deeper into, like why is it O of n, or like is it really O of n, or obviously, is there a better optimized solution? And sometimes like we're not trying to like make you mess up. We want to gauge like how technical you are, right? How in depth
Mhm.
you are. So we'll keep going further and further down until we talk about like bit level code, until you don't know anymore. Which it's not a bad thing. Nobody knows like everything about bit level code about every leak code problem, right? But they will keep going down, and obviously, the further you can kind of answer those questions, a lot better than just shoving an answer into the thing and it runs, it works, and then that's kind of the end of that, right? So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think in terms of actually going about your preparation, for example, I wasn't I was kind of strategic in the leak codes that I chose to practice on. So it's not just about, okay, if I do 100 practice problems, I'll be ready for this interview. It's more about making sure you kind of understand the process of going about them. So, and you do get better with practice, but I think you also need to be strategic in what you choose to practice. So, what I did is I made sure that for every big topic, like, using linked lists or using trees or using like this kind of algorithm, I made sure that I was trying to do one or two from each category and really understanding how you approach that type of problem rather than that specific solution. I think a lot of times you realize after you practice with a wide enough variety that there is, obviously all the questions differ a lot, but there is a general kind of approach for like a few different types of problems that you can kind of begin to understand. And then you'll have a better idea of if you have anything that's even not like a similar question, but you realize the approach is similar, you can kind of more easily get it the next time.
Yeah,
Um,
and I guarantee you, if you're able to solve the question they give you, they'll change the question just a little bit to see if you can update your code to make it work. So, for example, like two sum, they'll probably ask you like, okay, how would you do a three sum, right?
yeah,
So definitely be ready to answer that.
yeah, that's a great point. So a lot of times, if you have a specific problem they give and you get it correct and it's like, one of the more optimized solutions, they're not going to just be like, okay, well, you finished early. That's it for the interview. Good job. They will try to, based on your skill level, they do try to prompt you and kind of get more out of you and see what you're capable of. So they might make the problem harder and be like, okay, now that you have this solution, if I make it, give you this restraint, how are you going to change your code or how are you going to fix it to account for that? Um, so yeah, I think that's a great point. Definitely something to keep in mind. And I will say, it is doing a mock interview for this kind of stuff is hard. Obviously, it's not something you can do like with the behavioral interviews. You can't really do it with a non-technical person. They won't really know what you're talking about. So one thing I definitely recommend is having like a study buddy. A lot of times, even just having someone, even if they're not, like a manager who actually conducts interviews themselves. I found it helpful to just do mock technical interviews with my friends in college, even if they were, they're my same level. We're both just studying and trying our best to prepare for the interviews. We're not really like neither of us were very experienced, but that was still helpful in being able to just practice talking through the code. And at least it's still someone who they're preparing, so they still understand like on some level kind of what your code is and things. So um, I would say that's important. Also, a lot of, I think I haven't looked into this too much, but I have found websites where you can set up mock technical interviews with people that if you don't have someone that you personally know to do this with. So definitely like look into that. I've looked into it a little bit and they do exist. There's really like websites for all sorts of tech interview prep. So it's really great that you can find so many resources for every aspect of the process. Um, but yeah, let me just, so in terms of, speaking of resources, I did want to quickly mention, I think in this presentation, I talked about HackerRank and LeetCode. Those are just two of the most popular websites, but there are like a lot more websites that have so many technical coding problems that you can practice from. So like I said, the matter of finding enough isn't the problem, but it's more remembering to be strategic in how you practice and making sure you are looking at not just the solution, but you're looking at the overall high level of how things work, how you can improve, just like the general questions that June was mentioning before are things that you should think about for every problem you practice. So it's not just like a 30-minute commitment where you do the problem and you're done. It's more like 2 hours where you do the problem, you think about the solution, you look at alternative solutions, think about why you didn't get those, why they're better. There's like a lot that goes into it. And of course, this presentation couldn't cover everything, but if you look online, there are a lot of courses even that kind of help you prepare for technical interviews. I've seen a couple on Coursera, like Udacity, just like those regular online course websites. There are also other websites that are just specific to the coding portion, like the technical interviews. So they'll also have their own courses or like even articles and things that give a lot more details than I could in an hour. But And then like one other resource I wanted to mention is Cracking the Coding Interview. I just had to say it because everyone has, I think like every CS student I knew in college had that book. It's basically just a book that goes over, that has a lot of topics about what you'll be asked in the technical interview. It goes over like all the data structures, common algorithms. Basically, in terms of like the CS technical knowledge, it goes through basically everything you need to know. So I don't know anyone who's like read it, sat down and read it from cover to cover, but I've certainly found it helpful as like a reference book, even if you know, come across a leak code problem that has a certain topic and you want to know more about it and you want to get kind of that higher level of understanding that you should when you're studying for these. You can definitely head over to this book or other books that you find and just kind of read up on that specific section and see what they have to say. I've always found that really helpful for getting kind of a wider knowledge of things. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, I think I've mentioned this, but if you Google anything about this whole technical interview process, there are so many resources that come up. It's very easy to find different people's preparation guides, different people's suggestions for how to prepare, different websites that have the topics that you need to study. So I would say, as a last thing, just Google anything you want to know and like you will definitely find an answer. June, do you have anything to add for either preparation or like resources?
I just want to reiterate two of the things you mentioned. That book, Cracking the Coding Interview, I really didn't want to buy it, but I did a long time ago when I was a new grad, and it was actually a really fun book to read. And maybe some people don't find it an interesting read, but I was surprisingly, pleasantly surprised. So highly recommended there. And one thing I cannot recommend enough is finding that study buddy. Obviously, better if you could whiteboard in person together. Like you will learn so much from that. I think of the three best engineers I've ever met, two of them, they actually study buddied together. One of them went to Uber, one of them went to YouTube. And they were both very new to, I think they only had, one of them had 0 years of experience coming into Walmart and the other had, I think like 2. And obviously it worked out really well for them studying together. So do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think having a study buddy is really helpful for this kind of thing. And like I said, I have seen types of things where you can kind of find people to do this with online, especially with like everyone being virtual for a year now. There are a lot of kind of like groups or different types of forums where people are talking about technical interview prep. So even like going through those and just like kind of, you know, taking a leap and trying to find people that way. You know, if you don't have anyone in your real life that you already know who's doing this kind of thing, I think that's like definitely worth the effort of trying to find someone. It also just helps keep you accountable in terms of studying. It does, like, studying for these interviews is not easy, and it's not always fun. It is very interesting, and I think a lot of people who are going into the field would be the type of people who end up being interested by a lot of these problems. But just the fact that you're studying for interviews and you have to do it so much and like try to keep it up every day, it does get tiring. So I think having a study buddy holds you accountable to just, you know, being like, oh yeah, like, you know, let's work on this problem together today and like this one the next day, and just having someone to power through the struggle with you is always helpful. In terms of, so there was actually one other thing I wanted to talk about, because we've been talking so much about the technical interview itself. I wanted to quickly talk about a few tips for when you're actually in that interview, and you're actually sitting down with that interviewer and going through a technical problem. So I guess actually, June, if you want to start off, do you want to kind of give your take on the most important stuff to keep in mind here?
Yeah, so I guess from the point of view as an interviewer, as I said, it's not important that you like know the solution. And in fact, like we do ask people like, have you seen this question? Have you done it before? We obviously, you know, want them to be honest and tell us, you know,
Yeah.
yes, we've done it, and then we'll switch the question. It is also very obvious, more than you might think, when someone does know the answer and they say they don't, and then they finish it in like 3 minutes. So don't do that either. As I said, honesty is key,
Mhm.
um, especially as first impressions. Um, but aside from that, like assuming you're not really familiar with the problem, talk through it, ask questions, clarify. And if you feel like you're asking too many questions, then go ahead and just switch it to like assumptions and say, hey, I'm just going to assume this, and like feel free to interrupt if I'm making the wrong assumption, just in the interest of saving time. Um, yeah, as I said, ask questions, clarify, think through your approach. Like, what's your intuition? Like, how do you think? Because at the end of the day, like your code is just like a bunch of like bits like flipping in and out on the computer, right? So you still have to be able to like abstract the problem out into, you know, I don't know, some like concrete way to solve it, right? I would say my personal suggestion is write your test cases before you even start writing your code, but after you kind of like talk through your logic, because you're gonna figure out like test cases that edge cases that you're gonna need based on the solution you have or you're thinking of. And also another thing I don't see almost ever, very rarely, but when I do, I'm very pleasantly surprised is comments in your code. So you've talked through the solution. Why wouldn't you just write them into comments, right? Because whatever your solution is should translate into code directly, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, documentation and comments just are important in general in real world software development. So lots of other things, but I won't cover all of those. I'll let you take over, Michelle.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, especially with the commenting thing, I do just want to note I feel like before you actually get a job as a software engineer, you don't really realize how important commenting your code is, but it is so important. Just speaking as someone who started a new job in the past year, um, when I have to look at new code within like Amazon that I haven't looked at before and there aren't many comments, it is like impossible for me to understand right away. It takes a lot to like you have to sit through and walk through everything and try to understand what each part of it is doing. Whereas if someone had just like as they were writing it left a few comments, that would limit everyone else's time. Like when they're looking at it later on, they'd be able to very easily see what the purpose is. And even if you don't know all the details, if you have like comments just explaining like every function or like every few sections of code, that goes a long way in helping people understand, just like improving the readability of your code. So yeah, I would say comments are and they're not really hard either, because like June said, in this interview process, you're already talking about your logic as you're coding out loud with the interviewer. So it's literally just what you're already speaking. You're just, writing down in a quick comment, like, okay, this function, the purpose of this is that it takes in this and does this with the data and returns, Y. So it's not tricky. It's just a lot of people decide not to do it. Not sure why. I think it's just, I don't know, people get lazy or like people aren't, I guess, as practiced as in doing it. I think a lot of people just kind of forget about it, but it makes a huge difference. Um, and then, yeah, in terms of a few other tips I wanted to mention. So real quick, when June mentioned before, when you're reading through the problem, you want to make sure you're understanding it fully, you're asking clarifying questions. One really big important thing for these coding interviews is that um, the problem they give might not necessarily have all the information you need to code the best solution. So there might be some parts where you want to clarify about, whether or not you have to worry about this specific case or talk about like, the restrictions. A lot of times they might just like miss certain things, not miss, but like more like on purpose, I guess, to kind of see what you're going to ask as well. Um, but it is important to clarify everything. So anything you have a question on, anything that if the problem has like a certain statement, but then you're starting to think about your solution and you realize that there are some cases that like may or may not fall under that. Anything that you don't know if the problem for sure covers or like what's in the scope of what you're trying to solve, it's really good to ask those ahead of time before you start coding. And it also looks really good because it shows that you're thinking about um, the problem in a deeper way. You're not just reading it, taking it at face value and just like diving in. You're actually thinking about it, trying to think about what kinds of things you need to cover. So it is really important to just like ask those questions and show that you are, thinking with that approach. And then I think one other thing, this kind of goes along with the test cases that June mentioned, but in addition to like writing those test cases beforehand, once you have your initial solution coded out, you should walk through with some sample inputs. So, if like the function that they're asking you to write, like takes in, a list of numbers and outputs some sum or something, you should do that with an example, like actually make a list of like, okay, this list has the numbers 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to see what would happen if this was input into my code, and walk through everything that the code would do while it was running. So that's really
One thing I will
helpful.
say there,
Yeah.
so obviously if you have a lot of like sample inputs, like 20 of them, like don't walk through like every single one in like clear detail,
Yeah.
but if you're talking about like edge cases, like interesting edge cases, before you like put it into your function and like run it, talk through what you should expect out of it. Like, hey, this is an edge case. It should fail or like pass or fail because of this and this, and then
Mhm.
actually run it. Because
Yeah.
like we see a lot of people that are like, hey, like this doesn't work. Let me just do like +1. Maybe I'm just off by 1, and like they'll just start like doing these like random things that are like, I can see what you're trying to do, but like in real life, that's not going to help you, right? By just doing like plus or
Yeah.
minus one every once in a while.
Yeah, that's actually so funny that you say that. I've definitely had experiences where like it a lot of times it really is just off by one, but if you can't explain why or like understand on a higher level why
Yeah.
you're adding or subtracting that one, it doesn't look good. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, just know understand what the code you wrote yourself, like understand very well what it's supposed to do. Um, you should have a really good idea of what you're trying to accomplish before you start, changing any random things for debugging, especially for debugging. So not even like once the solution is working, but also, if you think it's working and then it turns out you find some case where it's not working and it's, unexpected. It's not something you thought was an edge case or it's something you expected to work. In that case, don't like June said, don't just start changing random things based on that one, edge case input. Just think about it from like the bigger picture and be like, okay, why did would this category of inputs not work as expected? Like what's going wrong? It'll look kind of bad if you debug in a way where you're just like changing random things because you're not sure what's wrong. They want to see that
Yeah.
you're methodical about your debugging.
Yeah, can you imagine, like I hire you and like that's all you're doing all day on our production code, like just trying out random things to see if they worked. That won't turn out well for any company, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, keep in mind that, while obviously the day-to-day job is, of course, very different from a 45-minute technical interview, they are still trying to extrapolate from their experience with you in those 45 minutes to see, like, okay, how would they apply, like, this kind of thing to their actual job? Like, do they seem like the kind of person who's gonna, sit down and really go through what we like code the way we want them to, or are they kind of all over the place with their debugging? Um, but yeah, I think that's really important. And then I think one or two last things that I don't think we went into in as depth in. One, so once you have a solution, I think I mentioned this briefly before, but there are often multiple solutions to these coding problems they give you, and generally they range from kind of the least effective to the most effective approach. So a lot of times, the way they measure this is in terms of how long the program runs, so the time complexity, and how much space it takes up on the computer, space complexity. So um, these are, of course, like you should read more about like these concepts on your own time and really like, whether it's Google or whether it's like the books or websites I mentioned, really go into like what these concepts mean. But generally speaking, there is a way to um, tell like the runtime of a program. I don't want to get into like all these details, but like big O notation is basically what we use um, in CS to give a general sense of how fast or how much space a program takes up. So it's not like in units or anything. It's not like, oh, this program is going to take 3 seconds to run. It's more of just like a general idea. So it's based on, like given this type of input, is it going to run in like a linear time? Is it going to be polynomial? Is it going to be like less? Things like that. And same with the space. It's just a relative measurement in terms of the input. It's not like this is going to take up like this many bytes. But basically, the reason we have this type of measurement for problems like this is to it makes it easy to compare like what types of solutions and algorithms are better or worse than others. So one big thing about discussing your solution with the interviewer is that you yourself, it's good practice for you yourself, even before they ask about it, to bring up what the space and time complexity of your solution is. This shows that you're able to kind of think about your solution on a higher level, and you are, I guess, like just knowledgeable about things other than just getting the code correct, because coding is a lot more about than just getting it correct. These other things, especially in the real world, matter a lot. So talking about how much time and space your program takes up, and then also talking about if the interviewer prompts you for a better solution, or if you think of a better solution on your own, talk about the trade-offs between those. So a lot of times, something that's common is like a lot of solutions, one might be a lot better with the runtime. It might be a lot faster, but use up more space. And then like another solution might use up a lot less space, but run slower. So talking about the different trade-offs between solutions and showing the interviewer that you're able to recognize these types of things, which are important to think about like in the real world, I think is really important as well. June, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, I've said before earlier is like don't focus so much on like memorizing the solutions and like, oh, if I come across hash maps, I should start saying this and this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you're never gonna like know everything in depth, all the time, but you can have like that problem solving like mindset, right? And understanding like, okay, like, is this like, why is this, O of n or O of one on average, but like O of n like worst case, or like O of n like amortized, right? And understanding it at least even in that context, and then you can start building that like foundation of like problem solving, and apply it to other questions, because like you're gonna study a whole bunch of time, and at some point you're gonna come across an interview where they're gonna ask you a question you don't know. Like that's definitely going to happen. And the only thing that's going to help you there is just your straight up problem solving skills.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that goes back to really being mindful about the way you're preparing. It's quality over quantity, basically, I think I would say. So make sure you're preparing in a way that's helping you understand these concepts and understand how to approach these things rather than just memorizing anything. Even with problems that, like new problems that come up, you should be able to apply the same concepts you already studied, and still be able to kind of get through it and understand how to approach the solution without having an answer memorized. And that goes for runtime and space complexity too. Like you might have, I mean, it is like pretty general knowledge to just like off the top of your head know, at least while you're studying for these things, maybe not if you haven't in a while, but as you're studying, it's general knowledge that like you may know, like, okay, an array has like ov and like search time, like things like that are pretty, um, I would say like regular, and that is good to know and have memorized. But when you're actually looking at the space and runtime of a solution, that will generally have like be more involved than just like, okay, this just accesses this one data structure one time. It's more complicated than that. So you're going to have to kind of like think through, okay, how many times are we actually running through this part? How many, like, what is this for loop doing? How many times are we running through that in terms of the input? It takes a lot of like, I guess, critical thinking, but it's definitely doable with practice. It's just you have to put in the practice. For all your coding problems that you do, you should think about the space and runtime as well. Like I said before, it's not just doing the problem, getting it right, and moving on to the next one. Like you have to go through and go back through it and think about all these different things for every single problem. That'll be that'll be the most effective way to actually get what you want out of your studying time, basically. Um, but yeah, I think this actually covers, I think, pretty much everything I wanted to go through. I did originally have a mock interview planned, but we are pretty late on time. So, and like we mentioned in this, mock interviews or interviews in general do take like 30 to 45 minutes. So I won't go through that whole thing. But if anyone has further questions or you know, are confused about anything or want to reach out about anything I mentioned in this, definitely feel free. For all the serverless camp people, just feel free to DM me on Slack. Um, and like I'm sure, you know, June will be willing to answer some questions, but I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to answer questions, and I do want to do a plug here for a friend, my friend Fang. He's a great engineer. He's at DoorDash right now, but he's doing tutoring on the side for more like algorithm and architecture related stuff. And he's great. He tutored someone I recently hired into my target team. So if you feel that you need a little bit more handholding or guidance on figuring out these technical interviews, let me know and I can get you guys connected.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I just want to mention, of course, we're not saying that it's, you know, necessary to go through tutoring just to get a tech interview job. It's definitely possible to do this on your own with all the resources online, or if you want to like buy the Cracking the Coding interview book or like buy any online courses, that's fine too. Um, but there's nothing wrong with getting extra help for this. It is a very difficult process. It's not easy and it takes a lot of time and effort, especially if you know, you have like no prior experience preparing for this kind of thing. I think for people in college, it becomes a little easier because you have all of your peers that are also working on preparing for these types of interviews. You have a lot of just like tangential like help because other people are kind of talking about it or doing it, or you know, maybe like your professors have experience with it. Um, but for non-traditional students, I do think, you know, if you think you need the extra help or you don't have the time, because that's another big thing, having the time to actually go through and figure out how you're going to approach studying this, it's not easy. So yeah, if you feel like like, you know, want tutoring services, of course, June's friend is one option. So definitely feel free to reach out to him. And just in general, if there are any like paid things online, um, there's no harm in paying for some extra help. It'll definitely, you know, be worth it. It's just a matter of how much time you yourself have versus how much time you'd rather, you know, have someone else kind of do some of the work in figuring out what resources to give you, and then you can go from there. Um, but yeah, I think that pretty much concludes this event. I just want to say thank you for everyone who watched, or if you're watching this later on, thank you for watching. If you, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Slack. If you're someone who isn't part of Serverless Camp, I guess like feel free to check out our website. We have like contact info on there, and we also have like an info at Bit Project email if you want to get in contact with me specifically. Um, but yeah, other than that, thank you everyone for coming. Sorry, Shreya just messaged me. I quickly want to talk about our tech conference at the end of Serverless Camp, just a plug for that. So basically on August 15th, Bit Project is hosting our first ever technical conference. And this conference is called Serverless Days Student Edition. If you're familiar with Serverless Days, this is kind of an umbrella organization. So there have been many other conferences with this name in different parts of the world. Ours is going to be virtual, and it's specifically going to be a student edition. So basically, it's catered towards people who don't necessarily already know what serverless architecture is or have not worked with it. One really cool opportunity that we're going to have is we will have a coding workshop, I believe 1.5 to 2 hour coding workshop as part of the event. So if you have no experience with serverless, or even if you have a little but you're interested in kind of making a small project, we will actually have our instructors teach you how to build an application on using AWS Lambda, which is Amazon's serverless service. So if you are interested in learning how to build your own application using serverless, which is widely used in industry, generally speaking, a lot of companies use serverless architecture now because a lot of people don't want to host their own servers. That's a lot of work. So it's definitely a useful skill to have, and just like a good thing to know if you're interested in tech. So definitely do come join us if you are interested. And other than that, we are going to have a couple of tech talks, both from serverless experts as well as our own bootcamp students who created their own serverless projects as part of the camp. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be a great event for beginners to really learn a lot about serverless, learn how you can get started, and just be able to see what other students were able to come up with. So yeah, definitely feel free to sign up if you're interested. I think we have okay, yeah, so we just sent the sign up link in the chat, which is student.serverlessdays.io. So you can register for the conference there. And all registered people will be entered into a giveaway for a Nintendo Switch. So at the very least, you have a chance to win a Nintendo Switch, and you also have a chance to learn something new. So definitely come join us on August 15th if you're interested. And we also have all of these posts on our social media. So if you want to check them out there or share them, that is great as well. But yeah, that concludes this live stream. Thank you so much, June, for joining me. I think students will definitely appreciate your unique input as someone who sits on the other side of these interviews. So it was definitely a valuable experience to have you here. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so we're gonna end this here then. Thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to check out our website and the conference. Bye.